During the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, we have observed numerous armored engagements. These confrontations are not merely displays of military might. They also unveil pivotal tactical maneuvers that can define the war's trajectory. In this video analysis, we will delve deeper into some of the most remarkable recent tank confrontations and meticulously examine the strategies employed on the battlefield. On July 18, 2025, a pair of Russian tanks advances across the terrain while a Ukrainian Leopard tank monitors them from a distance. Upon securing a favorable firing position, it halts and takes aim. The initial shot strikes its target precisely. Moments later, the second projectile finds its mark as well, halting the assault. When the crew receives intelligence that two Russian tanks are approaching several kilometers away, they mobilize to engage them without delay. As the tank comes into firing range, a distance of about 1.5 kilometers separates them from the adversary. They aim their cannon and commence firing. The accurate shot compels the enemy to withdraw. It is a truly uncommon event, a genuine duel between tanks. In such scenarios, bravery and expertise typically become the decisive elements. Ukrainian tanks are seen setting up unforeseen ambushes for their opponents. Two Ukrainian armored vehicles take up positions, supported by a drone. They lie in wait for the Russian tanks to cross into their line of fire. The first shot is discharged, followed by the second. The third shell also hits its target, and the tank begins to erupt in flames. A single enemy soldier survives the ordeal and manages to flee. The Russian tank had been advancing but was swiftly rendered vulnerable. The Ukrainian tank awaited the opportune moment, struck and annihilated the Russian vehicle, compelling the enemy's retreat. Russian forces launched an anti-tank missile in an attempt to stop the Ukrainians, but the projectile fell short, impacting the ground instead. With the objective accomplished, the tank begins to pull back. The Russian anti-tank squad fires another missile, but this time it becomes lodged in a tree. A third attack attempt is also unsuccessful. The Ukrainian tank withdraws to safety. In a separate clash, Russian forces targeted and struck a Ukrainian tank. The vehicle ignited, but contrary to the common practice of Russian crews, the Ukrainian team did not desert their vehicle. One of the crew members undertook a massive risk, exiting the tank to assess the damage. He swiftly retrieved a fire extinguisher and successfully suppressed the blaze. As a result of this action, the tank was able to return to its base for subsequent repairs. This courageous act saved not only the vehicle but also the lives of the remaining crew. Furthermore, we possess footage of another extraordinary tank engagement. On the outskirts of a village, a Russian tank and a Ukrainian tank confront each other. The Russian tank initiates hostilities, but its shell misses the intended target. In retaliation, the Ukrainian tank returns fire, scoring a direct hit. The resulting blast causes the Russian tank to detonate instantly, leaving it completely obliterated. Following this, the Ukrainian tank departs from the scene. Let's now examine the next segment of footage. This may well be one of the most stunning tank duels of the entire conflict. One tank is on the move while the other lies in wait, concealed. When the perfect moment arrives, the second tank fires unexpectedly, delivering a devastating blow to the first. Consequently, the first tank is utterly destroyed. Currently, the most effective tactic generally unfolds as follows. A tank positions itself within thickets or forested zones, unleashes its firepower, and then withdraws swiftly. During this retreat, it keeps its turret aimed at the adversary, remaining prepared to engage again. It can also deploy a smoke screen to obscure its withdrawal. In practice, direct tank versus tank clashes between Russian and Ukrainian forces are not very common, as such duels are generally not highly effective. Instead, anti-tank guided missiles, like the domestically produced Ukrainian Stugna, yield significantly better outcomes. Before the war commenced, Ukraine initiated a program to upgrade its fleet of T-64, T-72, and T-80 tanks, leveraging its domestic industrial capacity. This involved outfitting these older Soviet-era tanks with explosive reactive armor, next-generation fire control systems, and night vision capabilities. As a result, Ukrainian armored units became more resilient against Russian armored forces. Moreover, the acquisition of Leopard 2 and Abrams M1A1 tanks from Western allies has tipped the scales on the battlefield in Ukraine's favor. When measured against Russian tanks, these Western counterparts are outfitted with vastly superior optical systems, enhanced accuracy, and more robust armor plating. For instance, Leopard 2 tanks, with their wide-angle thermal imaging cameras, can identify and eliminate targets even under the cover of darkness. The Abrams tanks, distinguished by their powerful engines and sophisticated electronics, can navigate diverse landscapes with great speed and adapt to intricate offensive strategies. Tanks fulfill a vital function, particularly on the Donbas and Zaporizhzhia fronts. The expansive, open agricultural lands in these areas enable tanks to execute swift maneuvers and launch surprise attacks on enemy positions. The Ukrainian military typically organizes its tanks into small yet highly potent units. These units utilize drones for real-time surveillance of enemy positions, allowing them to move into optimal firing locations, engage their targets, and then quickly reposition. This approach significantly complicates the ability of Russian forces to retaliate with counter-battery fire. Such strategies have transformed the traditional notion of tank duels into a contemporary form of mobile, adaptable, hit-and-run combat. In the initial months of the conflict, Russia's strategy was to rapidly push into Ukrainian cities with its T-72 and T-80 tanks. However, the inadequate armor thickness and flawed internal layout of these tanks made them vulnerable targets on the battlefield. A design flaw in the turrets of Russian tanks often results in devastating explosions when internal ammunition is ignited, leading to the complete loss of the tank. This vulnerability has allowed Western-made Javelin missiles and Ukraine's own Stugna anti-tank systems to disable Russian tanks with considerable ease. Ukrainian soldiers frequently coordinate these missile attacks with drones. A reconnaissance drone identifies the target, the anti-tank squad gets into position, and the strike is executed. This methodology has dealt a significant blow to the conventional armored warfare tactics employed by Russian forces. The psychological effect of these tanks has also been a decisive factor in the war's progression. The sight of Leopard and Abrams tanks within Ukrainian cities served as a major morale booster for both the civilian population and the soldiers on the front lines. These tanks are a concrete representation of Western support for Ukraine, reinforcing the people's will to fight back. Meanwhile, Russia has also brought newer generation tanks, like the T-90 Millions, to the front lines. Although the T-90 Millions is equipped with more advanced armor and targeting systems, its limited production quantities and susceptibility to sabotage in the field have kept it from achieving its expected impact. Ukrainian forces have successfully devised methods to neutralize even these upgraded tanks. Frequently, drone-guided ambushes have targeted the T-90 Millions, leading to their destruction or abandonment. In areas where tank combat is this fierce, the training of the tank crews is of paramount importance. Ukrainian tank operators are mentored by Western instructors, ensuring they can effectively implement modern combat strategies. Handling NATO-standard tanks such as the Leopard and Abrams demands extensive technical expertise from the crew. This training equips tank crews to react appropriately during sudden field attacks, maneuver to secure locations swiftly, or capitalize on the right moment to initiate a counteroffensive. Today, the Ukrainian military views its tanks not just as a standalone assault force, but as an integral component of a combined arms strategy. Tanks work in close concert with infantry squads, artillery batteries, reconnaissance drones, and anti-tank units to carry out surgical strikes that can alter the war's outcome. This integration provides Ukraine with a substantial edge over the more rigid and outdated armored doctrine that the Russian army inherited from the Soviet period. Securing strategic locations is another critical function tanks perform in this conflict. Vital supply arteries, bridges, and village access points are typically defended by tanks. When enemy armored columns try to press forward, they are met by these tank defense lines and are often compelled to fall back. Portable anti-tank systems, deployed in conjunction with tanks, have become an essential part of this defensive framework. Aided by thousands of anti-tank missiles from the West, Ukraine has successfully degraded Russian armored capabilities while keeping its own tanks in operation at the front for extended durations. This war has also yielded priceless knowledge regarding the future of tank design. Numerous defense contractors are now in the process of creating unmanned ground vehicles and remotely operated tank prototypes. These emerging systems offer protection to human operators while enabling the deployment of tanks into more hazardous environments. Ukraine has also started to pivot its own defense industry in this direction. In the coming years, we could see autonomous tanks collaborating with drones, sharing data in real time, and maneuvering independently across the battlefield. The war between Ukraine and Russia will be remembered as a conflict of constantly shifting front lines and frequent changes in control over towns and villages. In this fluid environment, tanks have proven to be the most essential asset for mobile forces. The Donbas region continues to be one of the most violent and fiercely fought-over fronts of the war. Its vast open farmlands permit tanks to maneuver with speed, yet this also makes them conspicuous targets for reconnaissance drones and anti-tank missiles. Consequently, Ukrainian tank formations in Donbas often use natural cover, like thickets and wooded areas, to conceal themselves, inflicting severe casualties on Russian armored columns with sudden ambushes before relocating. In the fighting around the cities of Donetsk and Luhansk, tanks offer direct fire support during street-to-street combat. Particularly in urban warfare scenarios, the heavy armor and powerful cannons of tanks enable infantry units to advance more successfully. However, the confined spaces of narrow streets make tanks susceptible to anti-tank weaponry. This is why the Ukrainian army consistently deploys its tanks in urban settings with reconnaissance drone oversight and infantry protection. This approach shields the tanks from ambushes while allowing them to serve as a formidable tool for clearing out enemy strongholds. The Zaporizhzhia front has recently emerged as the central focus of Ukraine's counter-offensive strategies. Here, armored units are required to advance through terrain dense with minefields, trenches, and elaborate defensive lines. The Leopard 2 and Abrams tanks, with their superior suspension systems, are capable of moving swiftly even over challenging ground. Ukrainian tank crews in this sector frequently utilize their tanks for nighttime operations. Employing thermal imaging, they pinpoint Russian defensive emplacements and advance in coordination with artillery barrages to create safe corridors. This tactic allows infantry forces to secure territory with fewer losses. The Kharkiv region has been one of the most intensely contested areas since the war's outset. Russia's initial plan to make a rapid push into Kharkiv was thwarted by Ukrainian tank units that defended the bridges and key roads leading into the city. In this context, tanks were instrumental in safeguarding supply lines and severing Russia's logistical chains. This logistical struggle underscored that tanks are not merely offensive instruments, but also vital strategic defensive assets. In the villages surrounding Kharkiv, tank units would hide in forested areas to launch surprise attacks, forcing Russian units into retreat. The Kherson front is yet another area that has underscored the significance of tanks. While rivers and marshy lands constrain tank mobility, the Ukrainian army primarily used tanks in Kherson to defend bridgeheads. Control over Kherson is of immense strategic value as it acts as a conduit to the Black Sea. Consequently, tank units there played a crucial role in both defensive actions and counter-assaults. At times during river crossing operations, tanks were ferried across on pontoon bridges to launch unexpected attacks on Russian positions on the opposite bank. The immense and varied geography of these fronts compels tanks to undertake a wide range of missions. In one zone, a tank might conduct a high-speed assault across open terrain, while in another, it might remain stationary for hours within a forest, setting up an ambush. At the core of Ukraine's tank philosophy is adaptability. Drones have streamlined the process of target identification. Coordination with anti-tank squads has been enhanced, and tanks now achieve greater results with fewer losses. In the early stages of the war, media outlets worldwide featured extensive coverage of Russian tank columns that stretched for dozens of kilometers. However, these massive formations incurred heavy losses and were brought to a standstill by Ukraine's nimble anti-tank teams and drone attacks. This served as another stark reminder of how vulnerable large, concentrated armored columns are in contemporary warfare. Ukraine leveraged this vulnerability to its benefit. By deploying small, dispersed yet highly mobile tank units, it targeted enemy supply routes, cut off fuel distribution, and impeded the advance of Russian armor. A further critical element of armored warfare has been operations centered on bridges and river crossings. Major waterways like the Dnieper River serve as natural dividers of the front lines. The Ukrainian military positioned tanks at the front to secure bridgeheads while using demolitions to sabotage river crossings and ensnare Russian armor. In these types of operations, tanks brought immense firepower to bear, pressuring the enemy and defending the river crossings to maintain their defensive lines. These real-world examples demonstrate that tanks are not just tools for direct confrontation, but also function as strategic bulwarks. The newer tank models received from the West possess significantly greater long-range engagement capabilities than the older Soviet-era systems. This enables tanks to deliver fire from behind the front lines, rather than being exposed at the forefront. Ukrainian tanks take up positions based on coordinates supplied by drones, open fire, and then move to a new location to avoid enemy retaliation. The extended nature of the war has also highlighted the critical importance of tank maintenance and repair. With assistance from Western nations, Ukraine has established tank repair facilities near the front lines to rapidly service damaged armored vehicles. This approach minimizes losses and allows tanks to return to the fight quickly. Tank crews are also frequently rotated with relief teams to mitigate the effects of fatigue and psychological stress. In its entirety, Ukraine's armored doctrine is founded on the principles of speed, surprise, coordination, and modern technology. Russia's heavy conventional armored formations often prove ineffective against these agile and intelligent tactics. This dynamic on the front lines is poised to become even more pronounced with the future arrival of new Leopard, Abrams, and potentially unmanned tank systems from the West.